Hello chums, and welcome to Taming a Monster, the series where I take some of Gran Turismo 7's most ridiculous cars to see if I can tweak them so that a talentless pleb like me can handle them without being killed to death. Like any common ruffian, I'm using a bog standard PlayStation 5 controller, and I have all driver assists turned off, except for ABS. Let's see what car is trying to murder me today! So far, I've featured two cars in this series which have the VR38 engine from the Nismo R35 GT-R, and today we have the third, in the form of the Alpine A110. In some ways, you could look at this as a spiritual successor to the Tommy Kaira ZZ2 from older Gran Turismo games, since that was a mid-engined compact supercar with the engine from a Nissan GT-R, albeit the R34. As usual, all upgrades have been applied, including the wide body and the body rigidity increase, and all settings are in their default state, except for downforce, which is maxed, and the transmission, which has already been adjusted for this car. The wheels are in the standard size. Decreasing the size can help the car over bumps or curbs, and increasing the size can slightly improve agility. The Alpinus has a front splitter for front downforce and a rear wing to add rear downforce and keep the car from taking off. If you're interested in learning more about aero, downforce, or any other aspect of tuning your car, I have a series called Tuning for Beginners which covers everything from suspension to differential to the transmission. The test track today was the Lake Maggiore circuit. Without any settings, the A110 isn't a half-bad starting point. It's wobbly like any other car on the default natural frequency settings, and being mid-engined it does suffer from some lift-off oversteer. There is also the small matter of 1000 horsepower going to only the rear wheels to contend with, so there's some power oversteer, but otherwise the car's surprisingly decent. The car's too soft so the wheels hit the arches and I was beheaded. Ow! I recognise that car. So it goes without saying that the first thing I did was increase the body height slightly and the natural frequency. Increasing natural frequency will stop the suspension diving as much when braking, or landing a jump in this case. I also increased the anti-roll bar stiffness, more so at the rear to help with braking oversteer. This time the Alpine managed to take the jump while calamities happened all around me. Bloody hell! The stiffer ride made the car feel more predictable. Where are you going? Though it still suffered with oversteer on throttle, as well as lift-off oversteer. It also suffered with some understeer at higher speeds. Next up, I increased compression, which usually helps the car over bumps. I decreased camber, which typically helps with the high-speed understeer, and it also improves traction on the straights. I also added more rear toe in to help with power oversteer, and front toe out to help with lift-off oversteer. The car improved slightly, though camber, toe and damping settings never make a particularly transformative difference to the way a car drives in Gran Turismo 7. Well done, you cock. For the final changes, I added some more front toe out and reduced rear camber to further improve lift-off oversteer, since the differential tweaks I was about to make would be cancelling it out. Decreasing initial torque will make the car more agile, potentially at the expense of some stability. I slightly decreased acceleration sensitivity to help with power oversteer, and I reduced braking sensitivity to make the brakes feel sharper. These changes actually made the car feel slightly harder to control. However, the trade-off was that the Alfie was more nimble and faster overall. Next up, it was time to head to the Nurburgring to see how the French missile would perform. In the end, I didn't need to make any changes to the setup for the Nurburgring. However, if you're struggling with this car, you can increase initial torque and braking sensitivity on the LSD. You can also add ballast weight. If you want the car to spin its wheels less coming out of corners, you can add weight to the rear. If you're struggling with the slight lift-off oversteer, you can add the weight to the front instead. It depends on your preference. So, the Alfonso is the third car I've tested with the R35 GT-R engine fitted. The first was the Nissan 180SX, which was rather underwhelming, and the second was the Lancia Delta, which was unbelievably good, only a few seconds away from the Chiron-swapped Corvette, which had an extra 800 horsepower. So, how does the French fancy compare to the lunatic Lancia and the, Nancy Nissan? Well, it's immediately got an advantage over the Nissan since it has 2 extra gears and better traction thanks to the mid-engine layout. Comparing it to the Lancia is less clear-cut, however. The Alpine has 2 more gears and it weighs less, but the Lancia has 4-wheel drive and more downforce, so this could go either way. Yeah, except that it couldn't. The Lancia is better without question. How much by? You'll find out in a moment. Either way, if you have a VR38 engine burning a hole in your pocket, I cannot recommend the Lancia enough. If you have 2 of the engines, well then this Al Pacino makes a good case for itself. It's been quite an easy monster to drive for a change, especially after the Corvette C2 from the previous video. Getting that thing around the green hell was, well, hellish. In the end, the A110 managed a time of 6 minutes 20, 11 seconds behind the Lancia, 4 seconds ahead of the Nissan 180, and very well matched with the Nissan S13 with the LS7 engine. So, that was my attempt to tame a monster. I hope my settings helped, or that you enjoyed this video. Join me next time where I'm driving a car that isn't French. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're feeling particularly generous, I'd greatly appreciate your subscription. Take care, and ta-ra.